Welcome into the Recession is Here webinar. I am so excited to be here with you today. My name is Jared with Financial Margin, and what we're going to go through today is how to prepare your life and your finances for the recession we are either going into, we are currently in, or that is coming in the future. Now, going through this process, I believe is going to be critical for your decision making. And being that I write, research, and produce personal finance content, I thought it would be well suited and timely to provide you with my take on the state of the economy and what you should be doing to prepare. Now, this will take the form of both informing you with data related to why I believe that we are actually currently in a recession, and then equipping you with a challenge to get your financial house in order so that you are prepared for what's to come. Now, you may be thinking, who is this webinar actually intended for? Now, I believe it's intended for anyone who is concerned about the state of the economy with the falling asset classes in financial markets, housing, crypto, and vehicles. Now, anyone who is either a W-2 or 1099 or is a business owner of some kind. Now, I believe more importantly that this is applicable to those in the workforce and those who are entrepreneurs who are going to be heavily affected by what's to come. Now, I believe that there is something in this webinar for everyone, for you to benefit from. So I believe that this webinar is for you. Now, if you're new to this content or unfamiliar with Financial Margin, then I want to be the first to welcome you. I am so honored to be part of your financial journey. I want to be sure not to just jump into the webinar without providing you with some context of who I am and why I'm here today to provide this information. Now, my name is Jared, and I pretty much eat, sleep, and breathe all things finance. Now, I've been in corporate finance for about 14 years now. I've worked for private for-profit entities, nonprofit, as well as the government sector. Now, all of this being said, this all actually began well before that for me, though. I started off at an early age, starting businesses, flipping things, buying and selling assets like cars, value add real estate, and now helping businesses and individuals build margin. Now, going through my undergraduate studies, I wanted to gain experience and not just have the education, but have the experience coupled with that. So I started off as a business analyst during college, then became a financial analyst, then a gaming analyst, and then graduated with my MBA in finance and became a director of finance before becoming a CFO of a multi-million-dollar organization at the age of 27. So what I do now is I oversee the finances for a multinational technology-based leadership company. Now, through this experience, I found that the area that I'm most effective in, that I bring the most value in, is in the area of strategic operations, in helping organizations streamline and focus their expenses, which I now focus on in my consulting business. Now, the content I create is around the importance of building and maintaining margin in your life and in your finances. So you'll hear this term throughout this webinar that will be for the next hour or so. Now, you may be thinking, why do I approach personal finance from the standpoint of margin? Now, I believe that the purpose of margin is to provide you with the tools and resources in order for you to accomplish those dreams and aspirations you have. When you're going through this process, margin is finding what inspires you and using that to propel you to make the changes necessary in your life. Practically speaking, being in a place of having margin is being aware of your surroundings, being, engaged enough to know the needs of those around you, and being able to seize opportunities that arise. But in order to get there, you must act upon that inspiration and align it to intentionality in your life. So when we look at the world that we live in a world that is consistently and constantly driving us to do more and more with less and less, pushing us for a better quality of life with quickly increasing, from a cost of living standpoint, a full life where we are overcommitted to satisfy the requirements of our bosses, of our customers, and even our families, our kids, and their activities, all the while maintaining our personal brands and juggling all of this, and meanwhile holding up the perception of being adventurous, being spontaneous, and being interesting. But I would just say that it's exhausting. I can be the first to tell you it's exhausting to kind of uphold all of this. But what is the right answer? What is the answer? And the answer, or at least the easy answer, is to opt out, to isolate, and to become numb. But the right answer is to lean into the right commitments, the right activities, and the right lifestyle. Studying some of the most successful leaders of the most successful brands, I've found that the secret sauce is not in the life of the busiest person, but of the person who is most disciplined and intentional with their time in order to create the opportunity for them to focus on exploration and creativity to further build that brand, to grow that brand. Now, these people build in boundaries on their time in order to accomplish this. For their time, talent, and resources, they build in margin. Now, I create resources around the topic of margin, and I do that out of necessity of what I've seen. As I've seen, countless people schedule away, mortgage up, and max out their lives. Margin is simply the antithesis, providing leeway in an increasingly marginless culture. So my goal here is to encourage you in this recessionary time to build margin in your life and in your finances. So we're first going to look at your life in particular and build the goals around that. So for many years, I felt the indirect pressure of having my life look a certain way in order to bring fulfillment and that elusive happiness. But I found the more I learned who I am, and maybe more importantly, who I'm not, the more I'm able to calibrate my life to fulfill the purpose to which I believe God placed me on this earth to fulfill. So in my world, this meant not rushing into building a family, focusing my spending habits on specific aspects that brought me joy, prioritizing relationship over career. Meanwhile, providing flexibility to explore and invest in the people and projects that allow me to have the greatest impact. Now, this, of course, is going to look very different from me to you, to the person sitting next to you. So enough of my journey for, up to this point. Let me ask you this. Why are you here? Now, you may have been, brought in by the catchy webinar title that lured you in, or it may be more than that. I assume you're joining us here today because of your concern around your personal finances, how you will weather this economic storm. Maybe it's due to a family member, a friend, a coworker, or someone else that invited you, that forwarded this to you, that sent this to you. But no matter how you got here and where you are in your personal finance journey, I believe that this information will be valuable in the decision-making process for the years and months and weeks and days to come. But I'm thankful that you are here. So as you think about why you are here, do you feel the need to reduce debt? Maybe to adjust your monthly expenses. Maybe it's to increase income or generally know what is going on economically so that you can better prepare your finances accordingly. Know that you are in good company, and with any and all of those reasons, you're in good company. You have there's purpose in you being here. So that being said, I always take those that I coach through a process, through an exercise to get a deeper understanding of where they're at in regards to the priorities. So a mentor of mine shared this framework with me a few years ago, and it's called the 7Fs. I have since added to the 7Fs. I added a component to it. So I didn't create it, but I use it on a regular basis. And like I said, I expanded upon it, but going through this process, I will briefly explain it. I won't spend too much time on it, but I do believe it is very important in determining why margin matters and in what areas. So we're going to be going through that process, and I encourage you to take time on your own to evaluate your own inspiration, your own goals, to get your life and your finances in order. So as I mentioned, I'm going to explain and further expand upon the 8 Fs. But what's important is to know what each are. And I refer to this process of priming the pump, and would encourage you to take time after the webinar to establish your goals for the year. The framework I will provide here will provide you with a starting point that will then enable you to develop a baseline of what your why is. The first component is faith. Now, for many, including myself, this is the driving factor. This is the foundation behind decision making, lifestyle, and the conviction to make an impact. That's greater than myself or ourselves. I would encourage you to write down your goals for this area. It may be spending more time in prayer, meditation, mindfulness, or reading your Bible. But I would encourage you to have a component of faith that is your means of grounding. Now, the second component is family. What are your goals for spending time with family? What do you want to be more intentional about? How do you want to inspire, support, and challenge those that mean the most to you? It's important then to move on to the third component, which is friends. You and I know, both know that you become who you surround yourself with. So really evaluating those key friendships that you have will be critical. Now, those that maybe develop you and pour into you, maybe those that you walk through life with, maybe those that you mentor and you pour into, but really think about those relationships. Evaluate these relationships for substance. Are you being propelled forward or being held back by these relationships? But what are your goals around developing the right relationships for the season of life that you are in? So that's really important that you spend time looking at that very closely accordingly. So the fourth component is fitness. Now, what are your goals around your overall health? This could be some kind of personal challenge. This could be your diet and exercise. This could also be health in the form of your mental health, your rhythms, your habits. But it's important that you develop some aspect of fitness, from a standpoint of your goals for the year. Now, the fifth component is focus. Focus is what your main objective of the year will be and is what I added. Now, what do you want to master? What do you want to excel in? This should be the area that you want to dedicate a certain amount of time to daily and weekly to grow in. Now, the sixth component is finances. Of course, this is predominantly what we're going to be focused on in this webinar today, but it's especially important that you have financial goals. How do you want your finances to change? How do you want to grow your income, and in what ways? How do you want to pay off or retire debt, and to what extent? How are you, going to evaluate your expenses to pare down those aspects that are not, financially, important to you? It may be the financial fluff in your life. Now, the seventh component is fun. Now, it's especially important and critical for you to build in aspects of life that you do just for fun. This may be a hobby, some form of adventure, or a way of picking up a way of, challenging yourself otherwise. But making sure that you have that component will be especially important. Now, the eighth and final component is future. Future is all about where you are going, what goals have changed as it relates to where you want to go in your life. What are you reaching for with regards to your career and figuring out, okay, what business do you want to build? What philanthropic endeavor do you want to explore, or something related to the legacy you want to build? But I believe it's important to speak to these things because it's critical to getting your life and your financial house in order so that you have goals that you're aligning those with. Now, if you don't know where you're going, you will most likely end up where you didn't intend to end up. So it's so important to actually have these goals. So being especially intentional with defining what you want will ensure that you seize the right opportunities in this recessionary environment that actually align with that. So when you're going through this process, my first challenge would be to take some time to write down what each of these components are for you. Ideally, meet with your significant other, spouse, close friend, mentor, or family member to review this so that you're not on this track alone. So you have some accountability of the goals that you actually want to accomplish. Now, beyond those closest to you, me and my team are excited to come alongside you in your financial journey. So I'll share later on how we can team up and help you in your journey. Now, in the data section of this webinar, I will initially provide you with a lot of statistics about why I believe that we are entering a recessionary environment in the US. I will then show you what you need to do to plan and prepare, and then how to get the support you need or may need along your journey to accomplish this. Now, as a disclaimer that I use in all of my content, please remember that my goal with Margin is to prepare you with the knowledge, but then inspire you to act on that knowledge. My goal is to be in your corner, bridging the gap between your trusted CPA, your attorney, and financial planner. My advice is simply from my own experience and the experiences that I've seen, walking through this journey with people, and is not meant to override or replace professional advice from your trusted investment professional. Now, this content found here is for entertainment purposes, so use this as an opportunity to evaluate your financial position and address the areas of concern with your trusted advisor. Now, we will be talking a lot about trends, risks, as well as your personal risk tolerance. So I encourage you to use this information as a means to get you thinking, to really think about your financial journey. Then I encourage you to do your homework so that you are researching and making decisions based upon your own well-informed financial convictions. No financial planner, advisor, or coach should ever make these decisions for you. You need to be the individual, the decision maker for your financial future by spending time in those areas that you value most, creating the lifestyle that is the best fit for your personality, and building a plan that best fits the legacy you want to build. And no one else can do that for you. Now, we have been through so much in the last few years. You may be thinking that we are either going into or are already in a recession, or maybe you're thinking that a recession is in the near or distant future. So no matter what you currently believe to be true, your current perspective is, we're going to go through some data that will help you formulate your own opinion and prompt you to improve your personal finances and your financial position, no matter what market cycle we are generally in and what financial position you are specifically in. So as we go through this, I'm going to provide you with a backstory. Now, on February 13th of 2022, I posted a YouTube video on my channel about how I had sold everything. Now, I realized that was a trending topic at the time, but this was actually something I had done in preparation for what I saw to come. Now, at this time, that may have been surprising unless you saw what I was seeing which I plan to outline in this webinar. Now, I explained in that video how I had been slowly downsizing my positions in some of my holdings over, the prior year to 2 years. Now, this was all in anticipation for what I saw as a market shift, much of which I, had yet to see come to fruition, but nonetheless, I felt like it was coming down the turnpike. Now, by nature, I'm more cautious and try to plan for all the possible outcomes that I can. So this part was not surprising to those around me. But as it was, it was dangerously said before, this time would be different. I saw what had been deemed the everything bubble gain more and more momentum, leading me to have a greater and greater concern of how it may deflate or even pop. Now, knowing that every economy has cycles as a healthy part of the process, this one too had run its course. The expansion, the peak, the recession, and the trough are all parts of the process and depicted here by Cliff Core and Invest Handbook. Now, we have enjoyed the longest expansion period in modern day history, but every expansion needs to peak and come to an end in order for the economy to reset. Now, I believe that we are currently not only on the backside of the peak, but we're trending into a recessionary period. So as I grew more and more concerned, I've basically filtered my decision making through the lens of two different outcomes with each of these asset classes. So each of the asset classes being impacted. That was whether there was more of a potential for further upside gain or greater potential for downside risk. I determined that the upside potential of asset classes gaining more and even more momentum was less likely than a leveling out and a declining or going into a full-on reset. Now, all of that being said, based upon that, I sold out of my positions in both stocks and real estate. I then downsized assets that I thought would have the largest impact of recessionary pressure that would push those asset values down. Now, I evaluated my budget in the form of income and expenses to see how I could continue to increase my income and reduce, my expenses, therefore providing a greater margin of safety, a greater level of margin in my life. Now, this margin is my hope for you, that you will make it a goal of yours to build in this margin of safety, knowing that almost 3/4 of all Americans live with no margin, living paycheck to paycheck, leaving them very susceptible and exposed to any kind of market whims. Now, what makes this far worse is that the majority of Americans are in a place where they have little to no savings. The greater the margin you have, the more options you have. And although living on the edge, may work in a period of expansion because you can continually find work and everything else, or maybe even at a peak in the economy, it is not a great friend to have when there is a time of a recession or a trough. Now, going into a volatile time in the economy, options are especially important and will be increasingly hard to find. Now, of course, this has been a process, and although my investment strategy is quite simple overall, it still took some time. Many gave me grief because at a certain point in time, there were asset classes hitting all-time highs, but I continued to reduce my position. So, it's got to be to each his own. And for me, this was the time to pare down. Now, it got to a point where I was seeing double-digit year-over-year increases in home values, used vehicle prices, surging to more than a comparable new vehicle, watching PE ratios or price to earnings ratios on individual stocks surge to unjustifiable levels, as well as a number of other flashing indicators. Now, this caused even the most seasoned investors I knew to throw up their hands and submit to the fact that this was like nothing they had ever seen. It was as though the fundamentals were broken, or at least they were tossed out the window because they were being disregarded. I think that there is wisdom in not getting greedy in a market that seemed to be hitting a period of euphoria where it could only go up from there. Now, we all know the famous Warren Buffett quote stating to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. And I know this has been widely used as of recent, but I would encourage anyone to look at where their thought process is. Make sure that they're not getting greedy, because I wouldn't encourage anyone to get greedy, but instead to be mindful of how you can continually be prepared for opportunity. Knowing when it's your time to make changes to your portfolio based upon your risk tolerance will ensure that you're not making financial decisions that don't align with your risk tolerance as a whole. Now, the most important part of evaluating the current market cycle and your finances in relation to the market is to stay calm, to use logic and not emotion in your decision-making process. By remembering that your ultimate goals and what they are, that you have ultimate goals and what they are. Now, I know that many people go through life without goals, but if you know your ultimate goals, you'll be less inclined to react to what the financial markets are doing and instead to be proactive to consistently adjust to new information as it becomes available. Now, this is why I started this webinar with the purpose of building out your goals for the next year. Now, when things become uncertain and we are in a place of reacting, we all get into trouble by being a little like this guy. We see the sky falling and jump ship. We sell everything off and we panic. This causes us to sell at the absolute worst time and to lock in our losses at a peak fear for the markets. Now, we all know of times we have felt concerned and things seemed out of control. Maybe you're feeling that right now. Now, if it is far enough in the distance, you may also think about how you reacted to what you were facing historically. Oftentimes, the reaction is not indicative, of how we would actually proactively operate with the same information. And in hindsight, we'd probably be a little bit discouraged by how we operated and the decisions we made. But that's all a part of human nature. It's all part of us being human. And we see others react in a certain way and we join in. We react emotionally to what, we see and toss out our logic and reasoning in the process. Now, the goal here is to train ourselves to be controlled, to be logical, to be proactive, and not to be reactive, especially in a market like we're seeing right now. So before we jump into the current stats, which are literally changing by the day, it's challenging to keep up with everything happening. But let me encourage you to be bold, to be full of courage, to remember a quote by Voltaire that states, "No problem can sustain the assault of sustained thinking." Now, my second challenge to you today is to find time to journal, time to pray, time to review your goals, or even exercise daily before checking your retirement savings, before checking your crypto wallet, your home or car value, and what's even going on in the economy or financial markets, the media's perspective on the next war, or maybe the socioeconomic issue that has arisen for the day, or health crisis that has expanded. Use this time in the morning to take back your day and proactively make decisions based upon your specific goals as an opportunity to apply sustained thinking to how you can be proactive to control the controllables, to control what you actually have control over. And when you do, I think you'll realize how little you actually can control in the world around you that's occurring, but you can control your world. So I would encourage you to calm down and remember that some of the best inventions, some of the most valuable companies, some of the most resolute individuals came from less than desirable times of war, times of famine, recessions, and depressions. So as Darren Hardy says, be the exception, or Manny Koshman says or refers to as being the contrarian. Both meaning to go against the grain of society. Don't be Chicken Little, and don't be, blending into whatever the herd is doing. But in order to do this, you need to prepare yourself for success in this area. Now, I believe that this takes the form of winning the morning, finding a morning routine that prevents you from waking up right before work, skipping breakfast, and racing into work, then to find yourself in a reactionary state of mind the rest of the day. So again, my first challenge is to control the controllables, control the things you have control of. Set up bookends to your day where you have fixed, healthy rhythms that ensure that you are setting yourself up for proactive, positive, and sustainable decision making. So going on from here, you may be asking, what is a recession? What even is a recession? And why should I even be concerned about it? Why should it be something that is, at the back of my mind? Now, you and I have heard this word thrown around a lot in the media. I would say even abused by the media. Not only as of current, but every single year, somebody is bringing this up. Now, this one word is used to cause so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt, otherwise known as FUD. Briefly stated, though, Webster defines a recession as the act or action of receding. Now, how this is defined in terms of the economy is economic activity being negative for 2 consecutive quarters for gross domestic product, or the GDP. This basically points to economic activity that is receding instead of expanding. Now, there are a lot of other indicators like manufacturing and unemployment, to which I will cover those further. But I believe that these will be the most relevant to you because you'll see them firsthand. You may be aware of a bell curve called Rogers bell curve that looks a little like this. Now, it covers the innovation adoption life cycle. Now, I'm going to use the example of Tesla. I have owned their vehicles since 2019, and the parallels seem to align for this webinar. So this bell curve has a life cycle with innovators, early adopters, early majority, late adopters, and laggards. So you can see that across the top part of the graph. First off, those that are the innovators, I would say, are those who are the ones who envision what could be. That may be an innovator like an Elon Musk, who envisioned the widespread adoption of affordable electric vehicles. Now, of course, we haven't quite seen the affordable aspect of that play out yet, but nonetheless, you then have the early adopters that may be the guinea pigs trying on the new technology for size. This may be those who early on purchased the original Tesla Roadster. Now, this had a sticker price of somewhere in the low 6 digits, and then beyond that, it was it had a couple 100-mile range, so it's pretty respectable at the time. Now, you may also have the early majority that sees the concept and is willing to try it out, and this may be the early stages of those purchasing the Model S back in late 2012, which was the more widely produced Tesla, selling some 2,650 units of those vehicles, and they had a starting price of about half the cost of a Roadster. Now, this first year of production surpassed the combined 4 years of the Roadster's production by about 250 units at the time. So if you look at the EV market today, though, the landscape looks very different than it did then. It's flooded with automakers creating EV concepts and production cars. we are probably still somewhere in the range of the early majority, being that the surge in interest around EVs has really occurred most in the last few years, pushing Tesla to sell almost, I think, 1 million cars globally in 2021, and they're pushing for an ending number of 1.5 million in 2022. Now, being that there are some 17 million new cars sold each year in the US alone, there's quite some time before substantial market share is accomplished, leading to the late majority, the late adopters, or even the laggards when it comes to the adoption of the EV technology. But it's moving fast in that direction. Now, all that being said, why do I bring up this concept? It seems a little irrelevant to what we're talking about today, but I bring this up because I see a correlation. I see this era of the economy similarly. You have the beginning stages of the bell curve with those who may have been sounding the alarm, for economic woes that were upcoming, but society laughed it off and didn't quite take it seriously. Or you may have your early adopters who believe that something is on its way, something is happening, something is turning, but do not necessarily know what it's going to look like when it occurs. Then you have the early majority that are basically spending time spreading the information and making adjustments in their personal finances. These are also those who are causing Google Trends to pick up on the surge in searches around recession months ago in June. Then you have a group of people, basically that they experience the economic crisis that falls between the early majority and the late majority. And I see this late majority as the period of negative GDP and the fallout from the stock market, both of which we've, currently experienced and are experiencing in the U.S. economy. So these are then followed by the late majority and the laggards, which unfortunately are the majority of Americans, the majority of the population who have heard about or been impacted by layoffs, volatility in the stock market, or have heard that the U.S. is not producing what it should, but are those who are blissfully unaware, blindsided that a recession was occurring behind the scenes, and are those that then don't have the time to prepare. And that's why I wanted to take the time today, is I want you to be one of those who is able to prepare for this. Now, I know that this bell curve is a funny way to relate the adoption of technology to the realities of the economy, but I thought it would be a helpful visual to plot yourself on. So my next challenge is for you to go through the process of figuring out where you fall on the bell curve, because this will tell you to some degree, where you are in regards to adopting the realities of the recession, not necessarily the purchase of an EV, but the recession in particular. Now, I ask you this because as we go through these statistics, I want you to be aware of how receptive you are to this information and actively allow yourself to hear the data for what it is, then come to your own conclusions, come to your own ideas and synopsis of how you're going to react. This may, shift your mindset once you plot yourself on the bell curve. But I ask you to learn to listen and to take action by applying this information based upon your situation and your own convictions accordingly. Now, let's start looking at the data in particular. I think it's going to be important to look at what the data is telling us. Now, I don't want to necessarily recap what we've experienced in the recent years, but let's look at some of the more major headwinds we have experienced thus far that have caused the brewing of the storm that we are beginning to experience. Now, we have continued to face different iterations of the health crisis. We have experienced significant job openings, as the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell referred to as there being 2 openings for every 1 person that's searching for a job. But this then being further exacerbated by the Great Resignation. Now, in February of 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Not new news, obviously, but this set off a lot of concerns around enemies and allies, and fresh concerns, honestly, about cyber and nuclear warfare. Now, we have faced ongoing China trade wars causing a limited availability of products, feeding heavily into the supply chain challenges, along with their zero COVID policy, further causing implications on the global economy. Now, as of May 2022, we are back to 40-year highs in regards to inflation, although it just recently plateaued, at least temporarily. We'll see what it goes to in the future. But at the same time, what we're seeing is consumer sentiment has slumped to 54.7, which is close to the lowest sentiment on record, according to tradeeconomics.com. Now, through this process, basically, I wish this was it. I wish it was just that. But fuel costs have surged to new highs and have topped $5 a gallon, to which the U.S. had to drastically drain reserves in order to temporarily bring gas prices down so that the economy wasn't crippled all the more. Now, food has risen a minimum of 9.4%. There's a lot of different stats on that over the last year, and hitting a 42-year high as well. If this wasn't enough, the cost of living in regards to housing and transportation has also surged as interest rates, utilities, and insurance have all climbed. Now, you and I have all experienced this, but there's no shortage of price increases these days. And although this is just part of the picture, it can be easy to become numb to the bad news, and especially with all that we've seen and experienced. Now, this is not meant to at all depress you, but it gets better. There's more going on than even meets the eye in that. An indicator that predicted or preceded the last 7 financial crises, according to the Corporate Finance Institute, is the inverse bond yield curve. Now, this typically, occurs 18 months prior to the financial crisis and points to the 10-year Treasury constant maturity minus the 2-year Treasury constant maturity. Now, that's not what's important, but what's important is this has occurred initially on April 1st, then again on April 4th, then again on July 6th, to which it has remained significantly inverse since then. Now, if we zoom out, you can see that all of the areas in gray, the bars in gray that are indicated, by a recession, and the yield curve dropping below zero each time, indicating a coming recession, you can see how that's preceded each of the recessions. Now, as to be expected, real wages, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, although it's up, are not skyrocketing to absorb these increases. Now, assuming that some of these areas will be transitory or temporary, or one of those words that we almost don't dare say anymore, the concern has been the wage price spiral, as consumers are basically in this place where they need greater and greater incomes to pay their basic cost of living, because their cost of living continues to grow. So this is not currently occurring as consumers are burning through savings and or increasing debt loads. But as of this recording, saving rates have hit, according to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, peaked at 33.8% in April of 2020, which is the Black Swan event, and have since plummeted to and hit 3.1% as of September 2022. Now, this is about 33% higher than it was in July 2005, before the last recession, of 2.1%, but that is no badge of honor whatsoever. Savings rates are so low right now. Now, housing is yet another area that has been surging, and according to the S&P 500, the Case-Shiller U.S. National Home Price Index, it peaked in June of 2022 at 308.4. Now, this is just the housing price trend, which has seen, since begun declines from its peak. Now, as you can see here, the index has far exceeded the prior housing boom, price index that we saw in the early to mid 2000s. But we're most likely, feeling that ratio of home price to income, and I would say that you probably are too. If you are looking at the home price to median household income ratio presented by long-term trends, it tells the story that the average home price is, in comparison to the median household income, is nearly 8 times. Now, although it peaked in May of 2022, what has further intensified this situation are interest rates, because interest rates have progressively increased over the last year or so. So according to Freddie Mac, 30-year interest rate mortgages have topped 7%, whereas just 1 year prior, the same time, with the same product, it was 2.9%. This has caused buying power to plummet. What's especially concerning is not that home prices have surged, even though they are now leveling out and are on the decline in many areas, but the extent of the housing affordability that has sunk. Now, take a simple comparison between incomes and real estate values in 2022, for example. Now, which you can find from a simple Google search. The median household income, from that standpoint, house price is $428,700, while the median household income has hovered between $61,937 and $78,075, depending on the source. Now, this does not factor in what the interest rates have done to affordability. So let's take a look at this as an example. Let's say you were to purchase a home at the median of $428,700, let's say late last year. You locked in a 2.75% mortgage for 30 years. Which put your payment at $2,432 as of 2021. If you were to go buy that home, that same price at the same price in 2022, based on 7.25% mortgage rate, this would climb to $3,571. This doesn't mean just a change in payment. It's a massive change in payment of $1,000 or more. And it means that someone who may have originally been approved for $428,000 now has greatly diminished buying power, assuming all else remains the same. So let's say that you got approved for the same mortgage payment, but interest rates are now over 7%. You no longer can afford that $428,000 home. And instead, you can afford $285,000, which in most markets, especially major markets, this will pull you completely from the buyer pool. Now, that's a whopping 36% in buying power based on interest rates alone that has been lost. Now, many signs point to this continued climb for interest rates, forcing less and less affordability for a home mortgage unless we had a major, disruption in housing prices, especially gains. Now, if you were to look at the month-over-month data for Case-Shiller for the composite index, the home price reductions across the nation may not look so bad. However, if you begin to look at markets that were more or less hotbeds that were increased significantly over the last 2 to 3 years, markets like Phoenix, Dallas, maybe Nashville, Charlotte, Vegas, San Francisco, or Salt Lake City, these cities have seen a much larger impact. This is linked to why we are seeing large real estate data services like Redfin report that nearly half of sellers are now reducing their prices in hotspot areas. And I've actually heard even higher stats than even that. So I was recently exploring a place called Boise, Idaho, and in the fall, and basically I was looking at home prices. And I found that a massive amount of homes had significant price reductions, especially since summer of 2022. Now, I believe that this is just the beginning, especially for markets that are considered to be in bubble territory. But you may consider using your own, your own place of where you live, your own state or your own city, and running a Zillow analysis to filter the homes that have price reductions in your area to see what concentration looks like. The greater Boise area has some 2,000 properties with, price reductions according to Zillow. But I think it would be interesting to look at your own area and see what it looks like. Now, let's say that you're not concerned about mortgage rates because you rent. Well, there isn't great news on that side of the equation either, as I'm sure you've seen and experienced, as we've seen rents increase massively year over year. Now, according to Redfin, the top 3 metropolitan areas with the greatest rent growth have been Austin, Texas at 40%, Nassau County, New York, if I'm stating that properly, at 35%, and New Brunswick, New Jersey at 35%. I mean, let that sit in. That is just 1 year. However, much like home prices softening and in some areas even correcting, there's some downward pressure in regards to rental prices as well. Now, if housing costs weren't at a breaking point for consumers, let's look at the debt load in comparison to non-household debt. According to the FRBNY Consumer Credit Panel, also Equifax factors in their data here. But as for housing debt loads, housing debt, compared to non-housing debt, the housing debt is nearly 3 times all other debt combined. Now, when you're looking specifically at categories other than housing debt, and you're looking at how that's all broken out, you see all but areas like credit cards that are significantly up over the same period of 2021 and 2020 respectively. Now, housing is sitting at a combined total of just shy of 12 trillion. Auto loans just above 1.5 trillion. Student loans surpassing auto loans at above 1.5 trillion. And the other, category of debt has $500 billion, a little less than that, in that area. Now, credit cards declined temporarily, but are now back up to almost $1 trillion, matching the prior peak of Q4 2019. And all non-housing debt now equals a little over $4.5 trillion. Now, looking at these numbers, typically the only time we are looking at numbers in the trillions is when it comes to the U.S. debt. Now, the U.S. debt topped $30 trillion for the first time in history in 2020 and has continued to climb at a slower rate since. Now, looking at the driving factors in recent years, the most obvious one is the health crisis and the full-on printing machine that came out of that the Fed basically began softening the blow of the government enforced, shutdowns. Now, this, along with massive spending otherwise, has pushed debt to GDP to unsustainable levels, surging past 100% and currently sitting at 125.58 and is off its peak of 134.24, according to Statista. Now, this debt to GDP, or gross domestic product, is huge, especially with the anticipation that GDP will compress in the coming months and years. Now, to put this in perspective, imagine that you, let's say you make $100,000 per year. Your liabilities exceed $125,000. Now that the U.S. basically has hit this number, it has a number of different tools it can use to manage this debt, but that's unlike a consumer. A consumer doesn't necessarily have access to all those tools. So you can see the issue with consistently spending more than you make because it does catch up with you over time. So we want to be mindful of that current reality in the U.S. economy. So think about this. When you are facing fear over a health crisis, a war, supply chain issues, with massive inflation related to areas like fuel, food, and housing, all the while experiencing wage growth that is not keeping up, what ends up happening? What is the reality for the consumer? The consumers are then forced to burn through savings, load up on debt, slow their spending, or proactively try to increase their incomes. As I mentioned, though, the consumer does not have access to the levers that the U.S. has access to. So consumers end up reacting to these scenarios by increasing, their debt loads. They end up taking these different routes, which are quickly seen as, as decreased savings rates, increased debt, credit card debt, as well as household debt otherwise. Now, what we are seeing is that consumers are doing all of the above. Savings rates are dwindling, debt is rising, and spending is in turn, or will be in turn, forced to slow, even though it doesn't really seem like that's happening a whole lot yet. Now, all of these are a recipe for slowing GDP, of which the consumer, from a standpoint of consumer spending, makes up about 70%. So where the spending goes, so goes the economy. So consumers are at a breaking point when it comes to how much inflation has increased, allowing for less and less discretionary income. So take a look at the Google trends related to search activity around recession. Now, when you're looking at this, it peaked for the year in 2022 at the end of July. The slowing economy is apparent, but seems to be slowly on the decline, which can easily lead consumers to have a spike in concern around that topic of recession in June and July, but then quickly kind of let it fade as it's leading many to think it must not be as big of a deal as they originally thought, and therefore their spending habits don't necessarily reflect the reality. Now, if you look further into the data, though, there are a lot of concerns around slowing buying behavior. To validate this, Walmart, Target, Costco, Home Depot, and Lowe's reported earnings and show broadly increasing inventories according to macro trends. Now, this could mean a number of things in regards to supply chain. Maybe it's over ordering to meet expected demand that didn't actually come to fruition, or simply meaning that consumers are buying less. But Walmart in particular noted that although consumers buy fewer items, checkout or cart totals were still on the rise, which makes sense with the inflation. So this showing that the real impact of inflation and lower buying power was really setting in. Now, what intensifies this whole situation is any disruption in consumer incomes and access to funds that they would have in order to cover the increasing cost of living. So when you're looking at that it's important to factor that in. Now, according to Wealthian's Adam Taggart, real wages are declining in almost every sector. This is a sigh of relief for small business owners and those concerned about a true wage price spiral, which most consumers aren't. It's more of the business owners that are concerned about that in the government. But even more so, concerning layoffs and those ramping up. So consumers are especially concerned about that. But we have begun to see layoffs from large corporations, and although these make for fear-inducing headlines and feed consumer sentiment, small businesses employ at least half the population. So employment is not fully dependent upon large corporations, as news medias may try to convince you of. Now, according to a Business Insider article, some of these layoffs have included real estate brokerages like Redfin, Compass Bank, Carvana, Coinbase, Tesla, Peloton, Robinhood, Wells Fargo, PayPal, Netflix, and ClickUp, just to name some of the familiar companies that have had recent layoffs, and pretty sizable ones. Now, since this article, there have been larger layoffs in the tech field, including Meta, Twitter, Microsoft, and Amazon. Now, a number of corporations are also doing hiring freezes, revoking extended job offers, as well as limiting events, business travel, and canceling programs. I know a bunch of people who or a handful of people that work for Fortune 500s who are already experiencing almost like the tightening of the belt. Now, some would argue that the government will jump in and do a 180-degree turn on the hawkish policies once They really see the hurt that is felt in the economy. But much like what happened with the multiple rounds of stimulus for individuals and businesses, I just wouldn't count on it. Fed Jerome Powell, to refer to him again, hinted at the fact that we need to reach a healthier balance, meaning that there is more hurt ahead for the economy in order for bringing about lower inflation as well as a more balanced asset value. So no matter what your position is on this approach, it's important to realize that the Fed most likely won't do a 180, won't do a pivot because they're concerned. They won't be concerned about maintaining a low unemployment number, and instead will be focused on driving down inflation by raising interest rates and crippling the growth, slowing the growth that we've experienced. Now, briefly looking at unemployment, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, everything still looks really good. I mean, the employment rate is really low. So unemployment is currently sitting at 3.7% and has been hovering there. Now, beyond jobs, people have access, people access funds through credit, which often comes in the form of credit cards, lines of credit, HELOCs, and the like, various types of credit. When there is uncertainty in an economy, though, oftentimes banks shore up credit lines. I mean, we saw this firsthand. This could be in the form of calling personal lines of credits like we saw back in 2008 and 2009, as well as more recently by Wells Fargo. So they could follow that track or simply just not extending new credit to consumers. And this can cause a logjam as well for those who are dependent upon that. Now, in addition to this, falling asset prices, consumers have less access to the equity they had just months ago on their homes. The equity or gain in the assets like homes and vehicles and retirement savings in the form of 401ks, IRAs, and arguably cryptocurrencies historically have been tapped in order to get funds to pay off debt or to fund a consumer's lifestyle. But since the financial markets began selling off in late 2021, we have already begun seeing a growing liquidity crisis play out. Now, as the trowel, at the trowel of the Dow was off its 2021 highs by 22%. NASDAQ off by 35%. The New York Stock Exchange was off by 22% accordingly. Now, when you're looking at this, if you're invested in individual stocks and crypto, your losses may be significantly more than the industrial average. And if you're invested in crypto, for example, blue chips specifically like Bitcoin, you're off 68%. And Ethereum is off 77% from 2022 highs. Now, of course, this fluctuates every day, but those were the peaks that were found from fall of 2021. Now, we have all seen the crypto, how it's fared in regards to the massive FTX collapse, among many other events occurring around the space. Now, another huge consideration to circle back on is surging interest rates. I know that I keep bringing that up, but even though you have the credit accessibility to refinance your mortgage, apply for a home equity loan or a home equity line of credit, or maybe refinance a vehicle or something like that, these loans have all become a lot more expensive, even if you have access to them. So the cost of capital has increased significantly. So the combination of a shrinking income and income sources, along with the availability and accessibility of credit and loss of equity, puts consumers in a bind to meet the demands of the increasing debt loads and cost of living. Now, it honestly creates the perfect storm, as the wealth effect has the reverse effect on downward pressure from one asset influencing another. And so you've heard that term of, the wealth effect, and it's actively working in the opposite direction. So going into a recession, you can expect that the disruption would start with any risk on assets like crypto and the stock market, then affect the bond market, housing, transportation, and go down the line accordingly. In a recession, nothing is insulated. Everything gets affected. So just because something like crypto or the stock market bounces back and begins to have some green days, that doesn't mean that the recession is over. It's a leading indicator of what's to come. And so typically the rule of thumb is to invest often and repeatedly, so that you are dollar cost averaging into both crypto and the stock market. Now, on the other hand, with assets like housing, you may want to watch key indicators like days on market, the moving average for sales, the sales price, as well as whether inventory is consistently increasing or decreasing in your area. Now, a good realtor would be able to provide you with this information, but you can also do some of it through Zillow or some other platform like that. Now, the car market is one where typically auctions like Manheim are watched to see the volume, average sales price, number of times a vehicle runs through the auction before a sale occurs. Now, all of this data is not meant to scare you, but to inspire preparation, to inform you, to inspire you to go do your research. Now, with the cost of living going up in the form of inflation and the cost of capital going up in the form of interest rates, to then combat the inflation that we're facing, there's no easy way out of this other than inducing an economic recession. That's why I believe that we are in or going into a recession. So if you are truly facing this, what should you do? You should prepare. That's obvious. But how do you know, from that standpoint, how to prepare? So let's talk about preparation from a standpoint of, now that you have the State of the Union, let's talk about where we go from here. Now, how you prepare for a recession will somewhat depend on the seasonality of life you're in, the season of life you're in. I relate this closely to weather patterns and seasons of the year. Now, I think that's, important to look at where you are so that you know how much preparation you need to make sure that you can get there safely. And in this case, to the other side of the recession. Now, I mentioned that I'm naturally more defense-minded, meaning that I spend a lot more time planning and preparing, and to a fault. Now, there is always a so-called happy medium that you and I should both strive for. There's a saying amongst real estate investors that you can go broke buying good deals, buying great deals. So there is risk being too defense or offense minded. So going into a recession, there are specific areas that should be addressed. Oftentimes you will hear these, three main areas basically that you should focus on. The first one being reserves, making sure that you have 3 to 6 months of living expenses. The second one being debt, making sure to retire debt, especially high interest debt, or restructure it accordingly. And the third one being focusing on your income, solidifying income sources. This is especially important right now as the employment rate is very low, and you can be proactive to make some of these changes, to make some of these moves. Now, I know that this is a ton of information and I'm talking fast, but I created a short course to evaluate where you're at in regards to your finances that I call the financial snapshot. Now, this will enable you to evaluate where you're at so that you know the steps that you need to take in order to prepare and weather this recession well. Now, keep your head up and remember that you have people in your corner who want your highest and best good, whether it's that family that's around you, your best friend, your colleague or coworker or spouse. Know that you have people in your corner, including yours truly. Now, in a recessionary environment, the highly quoted saying of keep it small, keep it all reigns true. So keep your liabilities at a minimum, work to pay off your debt, and build up reserves, therefore creating margin. Now, if this webinar was beneficial to you and you're ready to take the next steps to getting your financial house in order, during these uncertain times, I would consider taking the preparing for a recession course. Now, this is best for those of you who are looking to learn what areas of your finances need immediate attention going into a economic recession. Now, this course is meant to be self-directed and implemented in less than a week, so it's very quick. Beyond this webinar, it gives you the applicable kickstart components and steps to building margin through a course that's 4 self-directed modules. Now, if you're ready to do something a little bit more advanced that's going to transform your finances, I would consider taking the financial snapshot course or the financial deep dive, or even signing up for the margin membership bundle. Now, me and my team, as a reminder, we're here for you, here to support you in your journey to financial margin. So I will leave you with this: opportunity favors the prepared. Especially in a recessionary environment. But the prepared must then act. You must take action to get your finances in order and to then be able to seize the opportunities that come your way. So I would just really encourage you to really think through this process. Think about what you need to do, keeping it small, keeping it all, building a plan around what you want to accomplish. And so I just am so thankful that you joined me today. I hope that you will take the time to explore these options, to go through your 8 F's, to really dive into this and figure out what the next steps are for you. So God bless and have a great day.